Big time card coming up this weekend, UFC 263, and not in our main event, not in our co-main event, but still a 5-rounder. We have the featured fight at welterweight between Rocky Leon Edwards and Nate Diaz. And for Leon Edwards, this is a guy that just couldn't get a fight. His life did depend on it, and he couldn't get a fight. Everything kept falling through. And ultimately, after years away from the cage, after a huge win over Rafael dos Anjos, he ends up with Belal Muhammad. Now, again, we'll talk about the circumstances around it, but what do we know about Leon Edwards? Great boxing. All of a sudden, oh, you're a wrestler, grappler now? And then he comes out in his last fight against Muhammad, and he looked like a karate star. His kicks were absolutely on point. His eye pokes were absolutely on point and very pointy, and they ended the fight due to a no contest. Now, for Edwards, this is a guy that's been up around the top 5 of the division for the longest time. He was ranked, 3rd when the UFC stripped him out of the rankings, and then he ended up back in the good graces. And again, that fight against Muhammad, still considered a no contest, but he was running away with it. Just like Mason Jones last weekend against Alan Patrick, running away with it, illegal eye poke. That's what happened in the Muhammad fight. So, you end up with a Leon Edwards that's great at boxing. He's really incorporated his grappling, his jiu-jitsu over at Team Renegade BJJ with his brother Fabian. Aiden Lee's over there. Tom Breeze, all sorts of big names. Now he's taking on Nate Diaz. What the hell's Nate Diaz good at? Boxing? Jiu-jitsu? This, on paper, maybe if this fight happened like 10 years ago, would have been an interesting fight or an interesting case, or if Nate Diaz was like 10 years younger. But now it's just an odd spot because for Diaz, he lost his last fight against a really good fighter and the man who's on the front of this Panini box in Jorge Masvidal. And it was one where, could Diaz have continued and was the scar tissue too much? We'll argue about that till the cows come home, and I know Nate Diaz will, and by extension Nick will. But it didn't look all that great. But before that, he looked really good in the return against Anthony Pettis. So it is difficult, but in a spot like this, just a tricky fight.
Chael Sonnen has a saying, and it's you want to take the easiest fight for the most amount of money. Leon Edwards figured it out. Leon Edwards has done it. Every UFC fighter ever has wanted the easiest fight possible with the most attention possible. Leon Edwards has just signed and done that. You're fighting Nate Diaz, who, he looked all right against Anthony Pettis, but even Pettis at that point in his career, it's not like Anthony Pettis was at the stage that Leon Edwards is at right now. You have Leon Edwards, great at throwing leg kicks, great at keeping distance, great at counter wrestling, really good everywhere. He's just a great well-rounded fighter. This is a terrible fight for Nate Diaz. It just is. And I understand the UFC's trying to do him favors. It's a 5-round fight. I'm sure that helps Nate Diaz more than this being a 3-round fight. But the deck is stacked against him. Listen, the Belal Muhammad fight, you can't really take anything from that fight and say, wow, Nate Diaz is going to have some success like Belal Muhammad did, because if you look at that fight, Belal Muhammad's normally pretty good at moving forward, and he's the one who pressures his opponent. Well, Leon Edwards is the one who had him on the retreat throughout the majority of that fight. And although Nate Diaz is known for that forward pressure, I see him walking into a ton of just straight lefts throughout the night. And Leon Edwards has phenomenal leg kicks, too. Nate Diaz is a guy who has always struggled with those. I really think, every single box that Leon Edwards checks, Nate Diaz doesn't check in that category. All of Leon Edwards' strengths play into the weaknesses of Nate Diaz. And for all those reasons, I just don't know how Nate Diaz is going to win this fight.
And I mean, let's focus on some Nate Diaz wins. So you look at the fight against Anthony Pettis, which again, not that long ago. It was back in 2019, and he ended up winning unanimous decision. All of the judges scored at 30-27 Diaz. But Pettis has always struggled against pressure boxers. You saw that in Pettis' PFL debut against Clay Collard. It was a huge issue. So, good win for Diaz, 100%. I mean, he had taken, 3 years off, almost on the dot since the last McGregor fight. Let's go back to the first McGregor fight. What's Nate Diaz great at? Again, we talked about it, the grappling and the jiu-jitsu. And ultimately, his cardio is always on point. That was such a short notice fight at 196. It was originally supposed to be Dos Anjos, a little bit of a connection there with Edwards. But for Diaz, outlast the striking, work in the grappling and the wrestling, put them tangs on him, weighing 40 pounds more, and able to get the win there. But those things don't work well against Leon Edwards. And again, you can talk about it for Leon Edwards. Who was his last loss? What was the champ in 2015? He lost to Claudio Silva back in 2014 when Silva was this bugaboo Brazilian that could submit anybody. But if you go back and look at that one, it was a split decision loss. So for Leon Edwards, it is really tough. And the other thing with Edwards, let's talk about the win streak. Dominic Waters, no longer in the UFC. Albert Tumanov, gone too soon from the UFC. Vicente Luque, Brian Barberena, Peter Sabata, good striker. Cowboy Cerrone, Gunnar Nelson by split, but again, Leon looked really good and out-grappled the grappler and outstruck the karate master. And then he beat Rafael dos Anjos, being a much bigger fighter. He's supposed to get the main event over in London back early last year against Tyron Woodley. That would have been a big fight. That was before Woodley was way over the hump, losing a lot of fights before he was supposed to take on Jake Paul. Then it was Chimaev, and then Diaz. Diaz, minor injury out of their fight that was supposed to take place last month. So now we get this fight at 5 rounds. Again, the reason being because, yeah, you'd have to think that would favor Nate Diaz. He's going to like that. Do we see Nick in his corner? Who knows? I'd like to see it, but the Perez connection, they don't really get along so much, so maybe we won't. But it is ultimately an interesting fight. But if you have a look at the odds, Edwards open to minus 275. Tip of my hand. Wish I got him there. He's minus 550 right now. Diaz, a plus 220 at open. He's a plus 396. And if we have a look at Topology, 1,061 total fans, 86% Edwards, 14% Diaz. Matt, who you got here?
I think it's pretty obvious. Like, Leon Edwards, I think, is going to be challenging Kamaru Usman soon for the title, and I think he's going to do well in that fight. I don't think he's going to beat Kamaru Usman. Like, I think Usman's going to go down as one of the GOATs, probably. But I do think he's closer to Usman than he is to Nate Diaz at this stage of his career. And for Nate, this is a big opportunity. Everyone likes watching Diaz fight. Just this ain't it. Like, Leon Edwards is a bad matchup for him.
7-year age difference. My favorite Nate Diaz fight, if you want to go back and watch it, the fight against Marcus Davis, where he beat the absolute bejesus out of him. But Matt, both of us going ultimately with Leon Rocky Edwards to get the win. If that upset you, let us know in the comments section. Are you a big Diaz fan? And if you've got him, show some support down there. We got 2 big fights, 4 titles, both rematches. Figueiredo, Moreno. You got Adesanya taking on Vettori. You're not going to want to miss those. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.